What if I told you the world didn't just lose a pope, it lost a heartbeat of compassion, a voice for the voiceless, a soul who carried the pain of millions as if it were his own? What if this isn't just about a man in white robes, but about a father to the forgotten, a bridge between faith and the broken, a shepherd who chose the dirt roads over golden thrones? This isn't just a story of death, it's a story of life lived fiercely, humbly, and with a love so deep, even the coldest hearts felt warm again. Today, we don't just remember Pope Francis, we feel him. In every refugee he embraced, in every wall he tore down with kindness, in every tear he wiped away, without cameras rolling. So before you scroll past, take a breath. Sit with us, because by the end of this story, you won't just be hearing about the Pope who passed away, you'll be mourning the man who helped the world believe again. Pope Francis has passed away at the age of 88. It is not just a number that marks the end of a life, but the silence that follows the voice of a man who touched the heart of the world. The news came like a soft wind that carries heavy sorrow, the kind that makes even the strongest pause, look up, and feel the weight of what we have lost. He did not leave this world in noise or spectacle. He left in the stillness of Easter Monday, a day symbolic of resurrection, of peace, and of hope. But this time, it felt like hope held its breath. The Vatican, so often a place of tradition and ceremony, now stands in mourning. The bells that toll from its towers are not celebratory, they are aching. They cry out for a father, a guide, a man whose footsteps were never meant to be grand, but always meant to be real. He did not chase after power. He walked beside the people. And now, that walk has ended. His death marks more than the passing of a pope. It marks the end of a voice that challenged power with kindness, that met controversy with calm, and that reminded the world that compassion is not weakness, it is strength. For millions, he was not a distant figure in white robes. He was the grandfather they never met, the teacher they never knew they needed, the soft voice in the storm of a divided world. And yet, as death comes for every man, it came for him too. At his residence, in quiet dignity, Pope Francis breathed his last. And the world, just for a moment, felt a little darker. His final Easter, Massachusetts, was frail but defiant, a farewell wrapped in peace. No one knew it was goodbye. No one was ready. But the heart often knows before the mind accepts. And now we are left not with his presence, but with his memory. Before he became Pope Francis, before the white cassock and the global stage, there was a boy in Argentina named Jorge Mario Bergoglio. He was born on December 17, 1936, in Buenos Aires, far from the gold of the Vatican, far from the gaze of cameras or the whispers of cardinals. He was the son of Italian immigrants Mario and Regina. Simple people, honest people. He grew up in a home of struggle and faith. The streets of Buenos Aires taught him humility, and his family taught him to listen to the silence, to the suffering, and to God. He never imagined he would become the leader of the Catholic Church. He trained to be a chemist. His hands knew science before they knew Scripture. He lived among the people, not above them. His was not a childhood of privilege, but a purpose. And when the call came to serve, to follow, to surrender, he answered. Not because he believed he was great, but because he believed God was. At the age of 21, he joined the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. A life of discipline, a life of service. And when he was ordained a priest in 1969, he began not a career, but a lifelong mission to walk beside the forgotten. In slums, in prisons, in quiet chapels, he became a mirror of the faith he preached. He was not ambitious. He did not crave titles. But he was chosen by God, by people, by the weight of the world that needed someone to hold it gently. Jorge never pushed himself forward, but the world saw him in his simplicity and said, You are the shepherd we need. And so Jorge became Francis. And the boy from Buenos Aires became the Pope of the world. But he never stopped being that boy. He never let go of the humility that shaped him. He never forgot the smell of the streets, the pain of the poor, or the sacred power of silence. Even as millions bowed before him, he bowed before God. He was not known for grandeur, or golden thrones, or lavish garments that made the world stand still. He was known for something far rarer: humility. In a world that often screams for attention, he whispered. And somehow, the whisper carried further than the shout. From the earliest days of his service, Pope Francis taught us something we had forgotten: that power does not need to be loud, and holiness does not come dressed in pride. When others took the polished cars and private chambers, he chose a bus. When others dined with rulers, he sat with the homeless. He walked through alleyways where hope felt like a stranger, and he offered it a seat beside him. He lived not in the Vatican's luxurious apostolic palace, but in a modest guesthouse, a simple bed, a quiet room, a place that reflected the man more than any marble ever could. People expected a pope to rise above, but Francis chose to stoop down, to wash feet, to touch the hands of lepers and the cheeks of children with no names. He didn't just talk about Christ. He lived like him. His hands bore no jewels, only warmth. His eyes carried no judgment, only invitation. And for so many who felt unworthy, unloved, or forgotten by religion, he became the bridge they never thought they'd defined. He preached with presence. When he stood in the slums of Kenya, or walked through the devastation of the Philippines after a typhoon, he did not offer grand sermons. He offered silence, a touch, a tear. He gave the kind of love that doesn't need language. And in those quiet moments, the world saw the face of a church that was not towering and distant but close, human, and aching to love. He stood for justice, but never from a pedestal. He didn't hold a scepter, he held wounds. And maybe that's why so many believe him. Because he was broken too. Because he never pretended to be above the pain of the world. He carried it like a cross. That humility was not weakness. It was strength in its truest form. The kind of strength that bends to lift others. The kind of strength that sacrifices comfort for the sake of another's dignity. The kind of strength that walks among the outcasts and calls them family. And so, when the white smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel in 2013, the world held its breath. Cardinals had gathered to choose a new leader, and few could have imagined what was about to unfold. Then, the announcement came. Jorge Mario Bergoglio. A name unfamiliar to many. A choice that surprised the world. He stepped onto that balcony not as a man hungry for power, but as a servant stunned by grace. And history was made. He was the first Jesuit pope. The first pope from the Americas. The first from the global south. In that one moment, the walls of tradition were not broken, but they breathed anew. The church was opening its doors a little wider, its heart a little softer. He took the name Francis, in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, a saint who walked barefoot through poverty, who kissed the wounds of the sick, who preached to the birds because even the smallest deserved to hear the word of God. It was more than a name. It was a vow, a quiet promise to serve, not to rule, to walk with the poor, not reign above them. From the very beginning, Pope Francis began rewriting what it meant to lead. He refused the bulletproof glass in his Pope Mobile. He wanted to be near the people, even if it meant danger. He refused the armor of fear. He believed that love, real love, was worth the risk. And people followed him not out of duty, but devotion. Not because he commanded, but because he understood. From the favelas of Brazil to the war zones of the Middle East, his presence brought more than news cameras. It brought comfort. It brought light. He gave a voice to the silent, and in doing so, became a quiet revolution. He didn't divide. He gathered. He didn't lecture. He listened. He didn't elevate himself. He elevated us. And now, that voice is gone. But what remains is everything he gave. The memory of a pope who didn't sit on a throne, but knelt beside humanity and called it holy. When he chose the name Francis, the world didn't yet understand the weight of that decision. It wasn't just a name. It was a path, a calling, a deep, personal alignment with a man from centuries ago, Saint Francis of Assisi, who walked barefoot through dust and sorrow, who kissed the faces of the forgotten, who abandoned riches for love and saw God not in power, but in poverty. In that single word, Francis Jorge Mario Bergoglio told us who he intended to be. Not a ruler draped in robes, but a servant who would wear the wounds of the world on his heart. The name wasn't for tradition. It wasn't for glory. It was for the poor, the hurting, the voiceless. It was for the broken man in the alley who thought God had forgotten him. It was for the mother who wept alone with an empty stomach and a silent prayer. It was for the earth itself, exploited, weeping, and dry. By choosing that name, Pope Francis stood up and said, "I see you. I hear you. And I will not look away." Every time he spoke, every time he stood before a crowd or knelt beside a sick child, that name echoed through his actions. He didn't need to repeat it. He lived it. He stripped away the layers that had, for too long, made the church feel distant. He brought it back to the streets, to the villages, to the souls who needed not another doctrine, but a hand to hold. He called us not to adore him, but to return to something forgotten. Simplicity, mercy, tenderness. Like his namesake, Pope Francis chose to live close to the earth, and even closer to those who suffer. When the world saw a migrant child washed ashore, he saw Christ. When others debated borders, he opened his arms. And when the church trembled under the weight of its own sins, he did not run. He stayed. He listened. He wept. But his compassion didn't stop with people, it extended to the very planet we live on. In 2015, he released Laude et Aussi, a groundbreaking letter that would shake the conscience of the world. "Praise be to you," he wrote, not to himself, not to mankind, but to the Creator. In that letter, he pleaded with humanity to see the earth not as a possession, but as a gift, not as a resource to be used, but as a home to be cherished. He spoke of rivers as living things, of forests as sacred, of animals and ecosystems and skies all crying out under the burden of greed. And with trembling honesty, he told the truth, that the poor suffer most when the earth is destroyed, that the cry of the planet is the cry of the poor, and that if we close our ears to both, we're closing our hearts to God. It was not a political document. It was a love letter, a lament, a call to conscience, and in it, Pope Francis didn't point fingers, he opened hands. He asked us to see creation not as separate from us, but as part of us. And he reminded us that faith without care for creation is a faith that has forgotten its roots. Some praised him. Others resisted him. But he didn't speak to win approval. He spoke because the world was bleeding. And because silence, for him, was never an option when lives were at stake. He became the green voice of a church that many thought was too old, too distant, too unwilling to evolve. And he shattered that image not with noise, but with truth, with the quiet heartbreak of a man who loved God so deeply. He couldn't stand by while his creation was being destroyed. He stood for the planet, for justice, for dignity, and for a future that we still have the power to protect. If only we listen. His message wasn't just about climate. It was about care, about tenderness, about remembering that everything is connected, that the tree, the child, the river, the sky, the refugee all belong to one another. And now, that voice has gone silent, but the earth remembers. The poor remember. And so must we. Because in every gentle breeze, in every rising tide, in every act of mercy, the name Francis still speaks. He was never afraid to face the storms, even when they came from within his own house. When Pope Francis stood before the deep wounds of the Catholic Church scandals that had left countless souls shattered and betrayed, he didn't hide behind silence or ritual. He stepped into the pain, not with fanfare, but with sorrow. He didn't pretend those wounds didn't exist. He looked into the eyes of survivors, and he listened. He apologized, not with rehearsed words, but with a heart that had been broken by the same grief that broke theirs. He knew the Church could not heal unless it first admitted it was sick. He did what many before him could not. He called out the sins of the institution, even when they came dressed in collars. He named the evil. He condemned the cover-ups. And he demanded justice, not to win headlines, but to begin repentance. Because for Pope Francis, the Church was not a castle to protect, but a mother whose first duty was to her wounded children. He opened the doors. He let the light in. He pushed for accountability when it would have been easier to deflect. He forced the conversation when others wanted silence. And yet, he never stopped hoping. He believed the Church could be better not by ignoring its past, but by confronting it with courage. He knew faith didn't mean pretending everything was perfect. Faith, for him, meant facing the truth and still believing in redemption. But that battle was not easy. There were those within who resisted, who wanted to maintain the illusion of spotless robes. But Francis, with the weight of the world on his aging shoulders, never flinched. He carried the shame of a broken legacy like a cross. And through his actions, he reminded the world that holiness is not the absence of sin, but the presence of deep, costly love. And even as he walked through the halls of the Vatican, dealing with politics and powers that many never saw, he never let go of his tenderness. He remained a man of flesh and blood, who hurt, who cried, and who still believed in mercy. He showed us that the Church is not an untouchable institution, but a place meant for healing, for truth, for the raw and beautiful work of becoming whole again. But that battle was not easy. There were those within who resisted, who wanted to maintain the illusion of spotless robes. But Francis, with the weight of the world on his aging shoulders, never flinched. He carried the shame of a broken legacy like a cross. And through his actions, he reminded the world that holiness is not the absence of sin, but the presence of deep, costly love. And even as he walked through the halls of the Vatican, dealing with politics and powers that many never saw, he never let go of his tenderness. He remained a man of flesh and blood, who hurt, who cried, and who still believed in mercy. He showed us that the Church is not an untouchable institution, but a place meant for healing, for truth, for the raw and beautiful work of becoming whole again. He was mocked. He was criticized. But he was never deterred. Because for him, Christ's love was not a weapon, it was a bomb. It was not a set of gates to guard. It was a door to be kept open. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. He didn't rewrite every rule. But he shifted the spirit. And sometimes, that is even more powerful. Because where once there was silence, there is now a whisper of belonging. Where once there was exclusion, there is now a hint of embrace. And through it all, Pope Francis carried not just the hopes of the Church, but the deep ache of those who had been cast out. His heart broke with theirs. His love reached them. And though his voice is now quiet, the echo remains. It tells the forgotten, you are seen. It tells the judged, you are loved. And it tells us all, this is what it means to be Christ's. On his final Easter Monday, the world didn't yet know it was saying goodbye. Frail, barely able to stand, his voice trembling with the weight of years and suffering, Pope Francis delivered his last homily. But even then, at the edge of life, he didn't speak of himself. He spoke of peace, of humility, of a fractured world that still needed healing. His words came slowly, each syllable carved from the ache of a man who had given everything. And yet, there was no bitterness, only love, only the hope that, somehow, in the chaos and noise, we might still choose compassion. Those who watched saw a man whose body was failing, but whose spirit refused to fade. It was a farewell wrapped in quiet grace, a final message not shouted, but whispered with every ounce of strength he had left.
And when he passed on that sacred Monday, the bells of St. Peter's did not ring out in triumph. They wept. The Vatican was not just silent, it was mourning. Across continents, tears fell, not for a celebrity or a figure of history, but for a father, a shepherd, a friend. A friend. From Buenos Aires to Manila, from Rome to Nairobi, people gathered. Some prayed, some cried, some simply sat in silence. Because even in death, Pope Francis brought people together, not through power, but through presence. Through the memory of a man who walked with the broken, who listened more than he spoke, and who taught us that to follow Christ is to love without condition, to forgive without measure, and to serve without seeking anything in return.